Let's signify so we can manage it. 4, 5.
Okay.
Question?
You can start.
Okay, let's start with 5. Okay, let's start from, please, can we make it brief and just hit the point? Yes, the first 5, yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Prof. We are grateful for this opportunity. Please, Prof, what is your take about standardization in Africa? To a very large extent, we know that the step the Western world are taking many centuries back or many years back had made the music to be standardized, with the A prime, on 440 CPS and all that. And yet in Africa, we have similar instruments that are produced at different places, bear different, acoustic, all those things. So what's your take about standardization? And I'm actually asking this question because a scholar once said, that not having this standardized, thing is still the strong point that Africa is still doing so well. So I don't know, please, what's your take with that? Thank you.
Well, yeah, again, just briefly, because I'm not an expert on standardization, but it is true that there are shared propensities for doing things across the African continent. For example, our tone systems, yeah? There's a lot of tone systems that are shared, whether it's pentatonic, which we talked about here, the different kinds of pentatonic, heptatonic, you name it. We have been reticent about gathering these resources together in the interest of pedagogy. That's a shame. In Ghana, for example, there's still only one book on the music of Ghana as a text. That's in Kitia's book from 1963. There hasn't been a comparable book since then. And so, talking about standardization, which I'm thinking of more in terms of gathering resources so we can see the larger picture, not necessarily to force everything into the same mold. But I also think that importantly, what we're interested in are ways of thinking. In other words, mechanisms for organizing things rather than the content itself. The content matters to the people in a particular situation, right? So but the ways we think of organizing those I think are things that we share in a way. And if you're going to standardize anything, I would think that the mechanisms for standardizing things, now there's mechanisms for arranging and so on, establishing differences and that sort of thing. I think that's where the energy should go. But it is true that you can put whatever value you want on it by saying, well, the Europeans have standard this, and that. That's why they keep doing ABRSM and collect your money, and give you certificates. Now, we should, maybe right back, as they say, have a counter ABRSM, which, everyone has to play some tune or, play a sappho or be able to sing a certain, you can do all of that. Any of these are things that you can have thought experiments about. Who has the money? Who is in a position to enact whatever standardization we're talking about. And unfortunately, that's where sometimes the discourse disappears. Because we can sit here and wax eloquent about all kinds of things, but who is going to do the next important thing, which is what is the curriculum? Where has it been implemented? And where does it reach in the next 5 years and so on? And frankly, some of you may be interested. That's why I didn't answer your question about the future, because we can dream the future. I think for these purposes, maybe we should talk about something more mundane, less elevated. Yeah. I'm sure you're all inspired already by the 2-day symposium that we had. So we don't need any more inspiration. We need something on a kind of concrete, material level.
No, thank you so much, Prof. So can we take the second question?
Thank you very much, Professor Agawu. My name is Benga Falano. I have 2 questions, sir. The first one is how, especially as young scholars, when I mean young scholars, those who are just going into PhD or just at the starting level how do we balance Western academia, I mean, the workload or the curriculum of Western academia and sticking to your own cultural perspective? So how do we balance this? Looking at curriculum, looking at other things that you are expected to do. Somebody was talking about standard and all of that. So how do we balance that and still maintain a sort of artistic integrity, maybe as composers, scholars? So how do we balance that? That's my first question. My second question, sir, it looks like it's going to take like a workshop, but if you can just give us some hints on how do we read in an engaging manner, like we want to read scholarly articles, scholarly books that is lengthy. How do we read in a way that's, we retain what we read? It's easy for people to say, oh, yes, I've read today, then tomorrow I've read, then how do we really engage articles, scholarly articles? Not just like, I feel this is this.
Yeah, again, I don't know whether I can actually, but let me take the second question first, because it's a little easier. Read out loud. Read a thing slow, but just read out loud and keep going. One mark of you having understood the text is after you've read a paragraph, you are able to write one sentence saying, this is what this paragraph is about. Don't go to AI to do it for you, rather, because you will have missed the exercise of mind of doing that synopsis. So that's one way. Then the thing is, at the end of the article, you know that this article makes this or that point. Make a note for yourself, okay? And then you move on to the next one. So that's just briefly about reading. I won't say anything more. About graduate work, maintaining your integrity, again, a lot of this depends on which of the institutions you are in, right? You know that as a graduate student, you will be expected to pass certain exams. So find out how you pass that exam. I actually don't know that there are that many conflicts between something you are calling your integrity and what you are expected to do, Sometimes also, you go through the exercise in order to pass the exam because you're going to abandon that way of doing things when you finish. But give yourself a few years, okay? And the last thing I would say, and this is maybe there's a larger point we can also talk about, which is that I've always felt that education is very much about ways of thinking rather than a specific content, So when in music theory we were having debates recently about why there are no black composers in the textbooks, and people are getting upset, or very few women in the textbooks talking about where are the women. In our case, it's also where are the blacks, right? In how many textbooks like Aldwell and Shackleton, people say we want examples from the work of these people. And one of the things that was interesting, people were reporting, is that when they read, say, Aldwell and Shackleton, the chapter on augmented sixth chords, and then they see Schubert as the one who wrote, some amazing augmented sixth chords, it then registers to them as Schubert was good at writing, augmented sixth chords, resolving them, and so on. But the composers not mentioned there, which therefore includes all the black composers and the women composers, were not good at doing that. You see, I didn't have that problem when I was a student. It never occurred to me that the fact that you selected 3 examples of augmented sixth chord means that somehow you are discriminating against the Asians not mentioned, the Africans not mentioned. Well, what kind of thinking is that? You choose the examples. Music theorists are very opportunistic in that way. You choose the memorable examples, who goes to the augmented sixth chord and turns it into a dominant seventh, because you're interested in, if you like, the artistic use of that. You choose those examples. If you have 3 vivid ones, they are readily accessible. The accessibility is important. Then you put them there. As a student, learn something about voice leading and so on. Go to your repertoire, and if voice leading is pertinent there, then you do it there too. But don't be too, if you like, seduced, but that's not quite the right word. Don't feel that these exercises in theory and so on are anything more than ways of thinking, Then you can go to your material. Okay. Now, yes, I know that you cannot divorce them completely. But if you think that it's all about a certain content, then to me that takes you to a different sphere. I would actually say that it kind of undereducates you in a way, you know. But this is a big problem with post-colonial education. I'm sure you've been talking about this, you know. I know, for example, when my sisters were in school and they were taking, you know, home science, you know, cookery and so on, when you open the recipe book, you see shepherd's pie. How are you in that part of Ghana going to make shepherd's pie? There are no potatoes, there's no minced meat, there's no, so you see, you all like food, so. Yeah, you know, but we understood that no, it's about bringing certain ingredients together to produce something, you know. That's what you should take about. Yes, of course, maybe some years later you will end up at Leicester or something and then be eating shepherd's pie for lunch, and that is fine too. But the question of content versus way of thinking, if I were designing a curriculum, that's how I would like to push it. Now, of course, as we know more and as we have access to many more things, we can diversify our content, you know, and bring in things that maybe will appeal to you. So instead of talking about Brussels sprouts, you can talk about guavas or whatever it is. You know. But that's a big issue. So, yeah, all right.
Thank you, Prof.
So we're on number three.
The number three, please. Please, let's make it brief so we can start.
Yes, I'm going to try to do that. Thank you, Prof. I think I chipped that in before we started, but I want you to elaborate on. My name is Yohaki Ajayi. Mine is not really a question. You talked about atonality in your keynote address yesterday, and I said I was liberated. I told you before we started this session, and I was liberated listening to you say that, because I've never heard any scholar talking about that. That those composers are forebearers, like Yuba, who use a lot of atonality in his work, who are looking for a kind of relevance with the avant-garde composers. Because as a composer of Yoruba art music, I've never seen any way that atonality fit into Yoruba music, which is very tonal. So maybe for the purpose of this gathering, I wanted to expatiate on that. How can because I've been wondering, how do I put that in my composition?
Yeah, okay. So let's be careful here. With extreme statements about tonality, atonality. I think yesterday when I made that remark, I also qualified it just so that you don't go away thinking that you never have anything to do with atonality because it's just pretending to be with it, and so on. But what I would like actually to draw attention to is that we have only scratched the surface when it comes to African tone systems. You know, ways in which, so, Bode, maybe you'll talk about this during your session. But, and I'll just tell you as an anecdote. I had a student who was interested in what is the genre of singing, the Yoruba genre, where you're singing and then you're singing in seconds. So it's Ekiti music, okay. But this student went on YouTube and found all kinds of examples of parallelisms in seconds, okay? Now, you may or may not remember that Akin Yubai, back in the 60s, wrote an article, short article called Chromaticism in, what's the full title? Chromaticism in, I don't know, in African song or something like that. When you go through that, you will find all these semitones, seconds, right? Not the thirds or the fourths that you think are, but these are parallelisms involving dissonances, And I'm struck by this. You'll find examples in Tanzania, for example, and we have not been probing these sorts of resources and collecting them into, if you like, a bank, a tone bank, if you like, for regular consultation to help our composers continue to imagine things that are consistent with indigenous harmony. Right? Within that sphere of tone system, you will find dissonances of various sorts. Sevenths, for example. Fourths, well, fourth is it a dissonance or consonance? We can argue about that. Fifths and that sort of thing, but always very strongly parallel. So part of what I was saying is that the version of atonality that people got from Schoenberg and from Webern and so on, which were exercises. We all did this when I was a young composer. I was also trying to write atonal music. Woe betide you if a triad appears in your music. And it's a very serious problem, It was a technique of avoidance. What a negative way to compose, Though some people think that that's a good exercise, right? But for me, it was an exercise, and then that was what it was. I could not hear this music. In other words, it didn't make oral sense to me. Although it looked fine on paper, I couldn't hear it. And I know that some people find that being able to produce that sort of imitative atonality, that's really the one that I was contrasting with. But that there are dissonances and systems of dissonances that are in our indigenous music, which you can build upon as a composer. That is work that remains to be done. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Number 3 or 4 now?
That was 3.
4, yeah, 4, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, what I actually wanted to ask, Dr. Abe had hinted on it, partly. Okay. I want to just, make, this note just to, this issue about theory, and I know that lately it's becoming more resonant in our environment, theory and composition. I think what we are trying to do is to now look into our possibly indigenous and traditional resources and bring out the component, the elements that form those the foundation of those our musical resources, and then try to theorize on them, and all those things. Now, why I think it is important, truly, is that when we started out studying music, and our schools generally, we are founded on the theories of, the Western music theories, rudiments and theories of music. And it's because somehow over the centuries, the Western world has been able to put these things together, and it has now formed the basis of our curricula, and that we all share, and we read from books, and then it's been documented. Now, my thrust of my question is now, how do we get to a place where, we have something? I know that in Africa, we are now trying to, drive in the direction that, we too have theories that are undergirding our musical activities and all that. So how do we, although I know it's been said, unify these things and then get to a place where we can truly build our curriculum on these things, so that it's not just that, yes, we are just basically theorizing. All we know of music theory is just the rudiments and the theories that we have learned from the Western curriculum. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's be clear that the theory that was exported to us in the colonies, so to speak, is a theory that supports a particular repertoire. Right? Generally, it's a theory that supports the tonal repertoire. Occasionally, you read a little bit about modes, and they'll tell you go to Gregorian chants or go to 16th century and you get some modal music. But for the most part, the theory that is in those rudiments of music and so on that we all have to memorize supports a certain repertoire. Okay. So one question to ask is, if we want to devise our own theory, which repertoire is it going to support? What are we devising the theory to support? And that's where, again, I think we have to be contextual. But let me just make just one general point, that we need to rethink theory in ways that maybe enable us to pull together or to mediate some of the built-in heterogeneity of African materials. And I'll give you just a very simple example. Let us say we had a one-day conference on endings, on closure. How do we end our music? Okay? You come with your dirges, so-and-so will come with this ritual song, and so on. And we could have a very fruitful day talking about attitudes to closure. Okay, it comes to me as an analyst more than as a theorist. But out of those observations, we could have a theory. We could derive a theory. I know, for example, among the Akwafu dirges, when we're singing them, the very end of the dirge, you start to get faster rhythms. The Avis do that too. So the dirge will begin slowly. Adamto, me Adamto. And it's very slow, right? Me Adamto, never quarter. That's how it ends. Why are you doing these diminutive rhythms at the end? And it turns out that there are actually quite a few dirges that do that same thing. So if we reimagine theory in terms of something like this, then we'll find that we have a shared basis, because that's partly what theorists are about, to talk about it. You can obviously keep doing theory as scales, tone, semitone, tone, semitone, so if you want, right? But as I said, that is a theory that supports a certain repertoire. And yes, we should know about the scales that underpin our music, but there are many other things that we could theorize, or that could form the basis of theorizing. And that's where I think we need to be more imaginative.
Thank you so much. Can we have the next person? Number 5.
Okay, good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for the enlightenment. Basically, I just wanted to get some clarity, looking at the rigor in research and academic work, and then performances. Talked about you telling your students to read an article a day and all. Can there be a balance?
They don't do it, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, most likely it's possible. So I just wanted to ask, with your experience, are there scholars who are very proficient in their instrument, maybe they are very virtuosos and all that, and then in the academic world, they're also doing so well, they are writing, they are researching. Is there a blend, is there a balance? Thank you.
Yeah. I think I could cite a number of examples of people who maybe started off as composers, started off as pianists, organists, and so on, became scholars. And then, depending on the choices they made, things changed. Some of them would try to keep both things open. So they're scholars and they're composers, Then some of them realized, well, the demands of scholarship are such that we have to drop, something or other. And in fact, I have colleagues who were told by one of our senior mentors, this was a very promising pianist, and he was told, if you want to be a top scholar, stop playing the piano. Spend your time in the library. That's an extreme, But these are choices that we make. I think the African situation generally is more complicated because it demands of us to perform on different levels. So I know when I go to give talks, people asking me questions about so many areas that I don't know anything about, but they somehow think that, if you have a PhD or you're a professor, then you know all these things. And the truth is that I don't, There are some things that I know, and those are the things that I would be very happy to talk about. So The question, I can't give you a simple answer, but I can tell you that there are examples. Bode, I'm sure, can tell you about his experience as a scholar and a composer, an active composer, and there are others of us, myself included, gave up composition many years ago for reasons, not just because maybe we were not very good at it anyway, or we were better at something else. So it cannot be an abstract answer that says, try to keep them going. I don't know where you are in what your ambitions are, and so on, But remember that, life is long, right? We have 80 years and 10, right? So you can have a chance maybe later in life to do some things that you probably, are suppressing for now in the interests of attending to other things. So, maybe take the long-term view. But yes, it is a case that people have found different ways of balancing these various calls. Yeah.
Maybe something. Perhaps, particularly in the 21st century, many people think, okay, I need to put food on the table. And the gigs are not coming. But they know to be a lecturer, sorry lecturers, it is to be a lecturer, the salary is constant. And to be a lecturer, the requirement is that the pay is constant. And because the requirement also to get the constant salary is publish or perish. So that automatically, you know the outcome, So people will definitely focus on publishing because they don't want to perish, and also they want to sustain the pay on the table. But if you are happy to be in a place like South Africa or perhaps the US, there are grants for artists, or in Europe, somewhere in Germany, or even in the UK. Yeah, you can still manage, to portray as a pianist, as a performer, as a composer, because you get commissions. There are festivals for different things across the year. The entertainment art industry is quite balanced. It's a huge ecosystem. So if you are a composer, you have your own community. Yeah, that at least your commission works and you get paid. It will not be consistent, but this will come to some time. The festivals, it will come to some time, you perform somewhere. But in Nigeria, you know the answer. You know it?
Maybe we should also make clear that in other parts of the world, people who become, world performers of the highest caliber are not people who waited till were 18, 19, or 20, went to the university room to find out where Medal C is. There are people who have been playing in a home environment since they were young. A lot of what goes on in Asia now, China, for example, the child is barely standing. They put a violin under the thing. Well, by the time they're 12, they'll be playing the Sibelius Concerto. Yes. And some of us are now still, we've eaten so much fufu, our fingers are no longer not ready for certain instruments, So let's be a little modest about what is possible if we don't have that longevity. Now, that's where my difference thing comes. I think a child who grows up with an African child grows up with similar training can reach the same level. Yes. I have no doubt about that. But it's that the opportunities are not always there, or sometimes the choices are not made, and there's a lot of discipline and a lot of sacrifice involved in reaching those highest levels of performance, So it's not an occasional thing. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Why we have? Okay. You can ask them after this. We'll go online. We have questions online to attend to.
Thank you, Prof. Speaking of theory of African music, I've often thought of, although I haven't discussed it extensively with people, but I've sometimes thought of a certain release valve, which may look like a result, but you touched on it now.
And what is that way? You touched on the theory, okay, of European music, supporting, the theory supports the repertoire, okay? That is the theory, the theory of European traditional music now. I mean, traditional, European Western harmony, supporting. I'm wondering, shouldn't it be the other way around, that, the music that generated out of that theory actually supported that theory? And this is what I mean, that theory, historically and developmentally, it came out of the fact that, out of an acoustic, it's something that developed out of physics, acoustics, the physical properties of how sound behaves, in acoustics. And the theorists in Europe, in Italy, in France, over that time, they basically developed that harmonic system based on how sound, behaved, in physics, talking about physics, acoustics, and how it interacted with the human ear, how the human ear, interpreted those sounds, talking about the fundamentals and then the overtones. So, the harmonic system that generated out of that was as a response to how these sounds behaved physically in their physics, acoustics, and of course, how the human ears, interpreted these sounds. Mm-hmm. So now that you talked about the repertoire supporting, so I'm wondering, is it now possible that, okay, is it that Africans can now develop a theory of which our music will support, or vice versa? And will it be a different, they being human beings and we also being human beings, is it going to be a different, of course, I'll be careful again to say that, as time went on, of course, things moved on from the traditional, European harmonies, as it were, of the Bachs, and the pre-Bachs, the Bach, and then the Handel and the Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven, and so things moved on, of course, and then, of course, things generated more and more and more until it came to a climax of, the total, shutdown of tonality, but at least, they had that trajectory of the harmonic system developing out of that physics acoustic thing, characteristics, and it was the interaction of those physics acoustics things, the interaction of the human ears that they used in developing that traditional European harmonies until things now moved on. So is it too late for Africa to... I hope I haven't confused people, everybody with this, so what do you have to say about this, Prof?
Yeah, okay, so there are many things to say about that. One is that the harmonic series, which you are citing as the basis for European music, actually is limited in the sense that if you take those overtones you're talking about, you're going to start with C, then you get another C, then you get a G, then you go back to C, then you get an E, you get your major triad. But then soon you get a B flat, right? So that's going to introduce an element of dissonance in that. Now, composition for many of the people in the 18th century, especially in the latter part of the 18th century, is a way of shaping time, making a statement. It's a discourse of some sort which draws on certain resources, but those resources are not purely acoustical. This is the issue, right? So there's the acoustical foundation, if you like, right? But when I'm writing a string quartet in the 1770s or the 1780s, it's because I've heard other string quartets, because I know tonal harmony, not because I studied physics and know anything about the harmonic system. So I would be writing music based on my knowledge of other music.
Yeah.
Not necessarily my knowledge, unless you assume that every composer writing every piece works in accordance with what you're calling, the harmonic series, which is not plausible that way. It's like a language that you hear, So you can hear Haydn doing things a certain way, Mozart is doing things a different way. But I think that already happens in our music too, that people internalize a certain, set of tricks, and they use those. And yes, some of them may buttress what you're saying about, the acoustical basis of the music, but some of them are not paying any attention to that. Is the music interesting? Does it make an impact? Those are the concerns for people. So the question, though, that you're bringing up is actually an interesting question. Is it theory before practice, or is it theory after practice? And just very simply, if you take the theory that then leads to the practice, you can begin with some of those acoustical things. But the fact is that the practice, the composition, is also an exploration. Yeah, a composer will say, let me try something out. It hasn't been done before. Let me try it out. So they're not reproducing some previously heard thing. They're exploring. In fact, it is people like that, when they do it, then the theorists come and say, let me see if I can theorize what this person has done. So you have the pre-compositional theory, the theory before composition, the theory that comes after as well. So we're using theory, in a kind of, there are many senses of theory, And just to clarify, though, there's a difference between music theory in that narrower sense of the principles, the rudiments, and so on that we all learn, and then what you and others talk about in terms of critical theory, which is, dealing with those heavy hitters from Paris and Berlin and whatnot.
Frankfurt.
Frankfurt, yes. Let's not forget that, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Rob. So we have one person online. Then while we are calling, can we have 3 more locally? Then we have online. We can also have, let's say, 2 more online, perhaps. Then we'll close. Okay, let's start quickly. But please, let's make it, kindly put your thoughts together and let's make sure you hit the point as soon as possible so we can buy time to do other things. Thank you so much. Okay, let's go online. Let's have, of course, the phenomenon Kolawole Gani Kale. Let's have you, Mr. Gani Kale. Thank you. People are already laughing here. Okay, let's have Mr. Kolawole Gani Kale.
Hi. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Actually, it's noon here as well.
Good afternoon.
Yes. First, let me just say this is thank you for this golden, almost like one in a lifetime opportunity to have an interaction with the caliber of Professor Agawu and Professor Omojola, who I have been following for quite a while. I'm sorry, I will try to cut this into maybe like 3 minutes. Because I actually have a lot of thoughts that I want to express here, and I would like the Prof's response to this. One is on the critical and rhetorical strategy based on what has happened today. Professor Sir, you did mention that critics misunderstood your rhetorical approach in representing African music. Given the strong reaction that your critique of essentialism evokes, how do you balance provoking necessary debate with fostering constructive dialogue across diverse scholarly perspectives? Then, that's one. Your excellence with the rejection of your article on the standard rhythmic pattern. It highlights systemic biases in academic publishing, of which my old tutor, Professor Mekinzewi, had also been a victim. So, what advice would you give to emerging African scholars trying to challenge dominant paradigms within these often rigid gatekeeping structures. Mm-hmm. Then on the issue of theory as practice, you did emphasize that theory exists inherently in everyday musical life, even if not formally articulated. So, how can African musicologists better identify and translate these implicit theories in ways that both honor indigenous epistemes and satisfy academic rigor? Then on authorship and identity in scholarship, you cautioned against dismissing works based on authorship identity alone. In a field where local representation is highly politicized, how do we navigate the tension between valuing diverse voices and maintaining critical standard? And finally, on teaching and developing independent position, you mentioned your African Rhythm Seminar and your importance of equipping students not only with canonical theoretical tools, but also with confidence to form their own positions. So, given the weight of inherited Euro-American framework in music scholarship, how do you practically cultivate that kind of independent critical voices among students, especially those engaging African musical materials? And has your approach of this changed across institutions like Princeton and Harvard?
Well, yes, thank you. And you've asked some really very pertinent questions, but I can't remember them now. So let me just answer a couple of them, I think just in the interest of time. The first one was about representing African music. Were you following?
Yeah, at a point I also...
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The first one was about critique and rhetorical strategy.
Yeah.
Sorry, the first one was about what?
Critique and rhetorical strategy.
Oh, yes. I don't know what to say. I mean, I wrote that book, with what I thought were certain positions that I wanted to put across. I tried to engage what people had written, and this is important because sometimes we who grow up in oral cultures are accused of, writing things because somebody said it, but we didn't verify it, And it's very, very important to cite chapter and verse when you perform these critiques, because otherwise people get very upset. So go and look for it, and you will find it if you look hard enough, some articulation in a text of these positions. So that is the prejudice. That is, if you like, the scholarly prejudice that we're working with writing primarily. How you deal with orality, that, again, that will take us too long. But the rhetorical strategies, I wasn't even thinking about what these so-called rhetorical strategies, when Menkes came and said he's working with questionable rhetoric. I mean, like, questionable in the sense of, bordering on, these are terrible rhetorical strategies, or that something. And she actually even thought that I had been either commissioned to write this book to attack ethnic musicology, all kinds of assumptions that are really very strange in the book, in the review. So I can't prescribe, rhetorical strategies for anyone. Writing as like composition we were talking about yesterday is somewhat personal, but you should know the meta language in your field or in your subfields and try to engage with it, and incorporate it in what you are doing. the cadences of your sentences and so on, that's very much up to you. That's not, and I don't think that's what she meant, but just the acts of naming, the acts of where you need to hold back, but also just being very upright, upfront about things. That's what I was doing. Just to respond to a couple of the other things, the question of students developing their own positions. I actually generally don't find the students that I have, there are quite a few international students nowadays, there are also American students, but I don't find them generally reticent about saying, this is what I think, especially the American students, but then they will say. And what I try to do is to guide them. So even if we're at the level of, well, do you like it or do you not like this? And they express an opinion. Well, why do you like it? Try to articulate your reasons. Maybe it's different from any music I've heard before, or something like that. And then we get a discussion going. And then I can say, well, so-and-so, has a similar reaction to this. Why don't you read them and see if their way is, in other words, helpful for articulating your way. So those kinds of opinions are formed, I think, from just making people engage with the phenomenon, even at a very base level. Take that as a point of departure, and I think you start to get things out of the things. Of course, since they are young scholars, the more they read, the more they develop confidence, and the more they feel that what they're saying is authoritative. You see, a student can come and say, I've read everything. I'll give you an example because this will interest you. I asked one of my students who read Mekin Zawi's book, African Music Theory. Yes, you know that book. So the student was totally seduced by Meki's way of thinking, Meki's language and all of that. And she decided she wanted to read all of Nzewi, right? So she's like, this is what I mean by an article a day. She's reading this stuff as if there is no tomorrow, as we say. And she's a music theorist, and what she was interested in was Meki's analytical approach, because Meki has these things like fishbone analysis. You may have seen that concept,
Yes.
And what I did was I encouraged her to do it. I would meet with her from time to time so that she can tell me what she's hearing. I'm also learning, by the way, from this, because she was reading some things that I had not read. And then we decided that this was too big for a term paper, but she should just write a paper on Mekin Zawi's approach to analysis based on Meki's own analyses, right? So like there's one with flute tunes that, he transcribed and so on. Well, to cut a long story short, this student, having started off with Meki's philosophical worldview, all the pro-African things and so on, suddenly found that there was no consistent way in which this fishbone analytical technique could be applied. She took one example, the other example, the fishbone is in the first bar, the other one, the fishbone is in the last bar, and there's no consistency there. Now, I wish one of our African students would have been doing this kind of research, but it took, in this case, I'm not doing identity, but it's an Asian student who, but she came up with an insight, into this. I think, I don't want to go on for too long about that, but in terms of, that's a student who was developed a curiosity, developed some confidence, and now I think she can say with some authority something about Mekin Zawi's analytical approach, right? As exemplified in analyses, not a programmatic statement about analysis, but something that comes out of looking. She looked at every diagram, looked at every, if there's a mark here going up, she will look at it. So what does this mean? So putting it under a microscope, so to speak, and we want to be taken seriously, and that's how you take people seriously, by reading them closely, So that's another of the things. Now, I'm forgetting your other questions, but thank you.
Yeah,
for
thank you so
bringing
much.
up this.
I think we should take one more and close this session, and just for we go for a short tea break. Then we'll come back for Professor Omodora. Let's take one, the lucky one.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Ademola Adeosho. So, sir, I would be grateful to hear your perspective on a matter I've been reflecting on for a while. Although I've composed music over the years, I do not consider myself as a scholar in the formal sense. But based on my experience, I've come to believe that one of the factors limiting the autonomous development of African art music is the lack of structured requirements for composers to engage in in-depth research into the languages and cultures that they draw from. So to a large extent, these composers basically, without knowing or maybe deliberately, copy other art music, say Western art music, and in a way, we don't have our own African art music being developed, even though we claim that we have something called African art music. This reflection is from my background, from the music circle I belong to. Even though I wasn't trained as a music scholar per se, I belong to an organization that organizes competitions twice. And it's required that the composers must, apart from having a reasonable grounding when it comes to theory of music and things required for composition, they must also research into the language, the history, the cultural context of the language that they are writing their song in. And because of this has forced the composers in my circle not to write songs without investigating. So this exercise made us to, research into even the instruments that most people don't know that are unique to a particular ethnic group and the likes. And in researching these instruments, we realized that they have peculiarities that even while trying to notate with Sibelius and other software, you cannot. But then you need these instruments to, demonstrate what this is. And of course, this shows that the theory that we are using to compose in Africa is to an extent limited. So my question is it because we don't really have initiatives that force, or should I say absence of such research-driven initiatives is the reason why African composers do not feel compelled to undertake this level of cultural inquiry prior to composing, and why the songs labeled as African art music are basically derivatives of music labels, like what I would call Western art music. Would you agree with this perspective? I'm curious to know your answer. And like I said, I am not a music scholar per se, but then this question needs to be asked.
Yeah, I think, thank you. You're asking a question about composition and the history of composition, at least in the 20th century and down to our time, is maybe a little more complicated than, than what seems to be the assumption behind what you've done. So if you take individual composers, Akin Yuba, for example, everyone talks about, who among his critiques of ethnomusicology was that ethnographic work should result in something creative. So the only reason to go and study those dirges is because you're going to write a dirge or write a piece that draws on the idioms of the dirge. In other words, drawing on indigenous resources. Now, it is possible to draw on some of these indigenous resources without yourself going into the field. We have a lot of sources, We have, in Ghana, Nketia published a Folk Songs of Ghana, 1963. I've often wondered how many people actually go there and just, listen to these folk songs, look at them. Are there any melodic things that we can learn from them? Are there rhythmic things and so on? Not that many, you know? And you can start to cite such anthologies that people draw on, right? But ultimately, what you're talking about is partly an institutional thing. What do we teach in our institutions? But there's a lot of composition that is out of the institutions, where people are writing music because they have an interest in doing it. And if there is something they're interested in looking at, they just go and look at it. They're not waiting for a professor to tell them or to approve what they are doing. You know, it's interesting to be hearing, you know, this person self-taught. This, I think, is one of the things that we're not taking advantage of. Many of us could be teaching ourselves all kinds of things. This applies not just to composition, but also to scholarship. But we are waiting for the professor to tell us what to read, you know. But yeah, I see you on the internet all the time anyway, so I don't know why you'd be waiting for any professor to tell you things. And AI will always summarize things for you anyway. You know, but this educating ourselves in the process in order to then produce whatever it is one wants to produce compositionally, that's suddenly a path too, you see. So it's a complicated question about composition, and again, I think we need to be just a little modest about the extent to which we can be generalizing for the continent as a whole, and you know, because people are following slightly different paths. But I mean, just one last thing. I've often felt that, you know, like with composition, we could be doing lots of composition workshops. We do one a month, you know, with a different theme. For example, why not have a composition workshop in which we're doing folk song settings, right? For voice and piano, let's just say. Right? We just, 1 week, we assemble, and at the end of the week, we produce a number of folk song settings for voice and piano, or voice and 2 instruments, just something modest. Give a concert at the end of that. They could be works in progress. If we did one of those every other month, not every month, because, you know, we could be developing a repertoire there. There'll be experienced composers who can show us models of their work, and then there will be others who will suddenly realize that they had a compositional gift they didn't even know they had, you know. Help them to think freely, and immediately they produce something. And then there will be some disasters too, why not, you know? But these are all possible as initiatives.
Prof, what you said is actually one of the things we have lined up as part of Organhouse, actually. Yeah. Okay. So we have a plan for that. So please look out for our call for. So, yeah, the same way we called for Art Music Symposium, very soon look out for such call. And those online also look out for call for what we just said. It's part of the plan for Organhouse. So you'll get the notice. But when you get the notice, respond to it. When you get the notice, respond to it. Yeah.
Not just notice.
Yeah, of course.
Not just notice. Do you want to give her the last word?
Let's go online for the last one. Okay, okay, I'm coming. Let's go online for one person. But please, can you make it brief so we can actually, we still have session with Professor Mojola, and that's quite symbolic, particularly for today, you know, what we are doing. So please, let's be brief about it, please. Let's do it, you know. Okay, let's have Mr. Ajayi.
Good afternoon, Prof.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, this has been very illuminating for me. It's as a composer myself, I've been following many of your works and many of your documents and seminars. And then I listened to a particular one where you mentioned a particular one on post-colonial theories, where you mentioned the characteristics of African music. According to your statement, tonal harmony is the demon that African people have been unable to overcome since colonialism. And then you pointed out that the African rhythm is persistent and has not disappeared, unlike our tonality. So what suggestions do you have for Africans to address the persistent issues of functional harmony that have become common in our daily lives, especially in urban areas of Africa? in our universities also. So also because we do not have materials readily available for analysis of the different traditional African canons. And then I'm also like the convener of the Nigerian Arts Music Project. We did a call for scores sometimes last year, and we received a lot of materials. But most of the materials we received from within Nigeria were the usual practice era kind of harmonies. But the ones that we received from the Caribbeans, they had a different organizational structure, pitch organizational structure, which were more coherent. So I'm thinking to myself that what can we do as Africans in Africa to actually get back to the ideals, pre-colonial ideals, and make our compositions richer pitch organizations and all. Thank you, sir.
I asked for it, didn't I? Again, this would be another one to have a session on they call it harmony, tonal harmony, or tonality, or whatever, in which people talk about pitch systems. You see, there are ways of using tonal harmony simply just as an efficient mechanism. You use it because it's there. That was Nketiah's position. He said he didn't have to think very much about tonal harmony because it was just there, you know. And Uzoego, as I was saying yesterday, Uzoego says, no, you have to interrogate this thing because it carries so much baggage, you know. So one person is thinking, if you like, ideologically, and because nothing gives away a piece more readily than if you start doing something tonal. It immediately plants it with an identity. You can do all the rhythms, the fancy rhythms you want, but as soon as you show yourself to be a victim of that tonal functional harmony, you have announced a certain presence, you know. But what we need is to look at the works by people who have, you know, sought ways of trying to enrich tonality or Africanize it, as sometimes people say, you know, or diversify it in some ways. We need to gather those efforts together, bring those people maybe to MTU for a workshop, and bring young composers to learn from them. How did you, you know, what made you now start doing this kind of modal thing? Why are you leaving out the third in these chords, you know? A lot of composition can be done just with the resources that you have because they're individuals who have wrestled with these issues, you know? But the idea that it will come from elsewhere and it will fall down like manna from heaven, it won't work. There are individuals who really either have wrestled, you see it in their music, or are wrestling. And I will say also, and this is the last comment I'll make, and this comes also out of my own tradition, my own experience. I listen to a lot of music on recording because it's unbelievable to me what we have on the African continent, of which we know only a little. You know 5 hymns and you're happy. You're playing them every day and you think that's the end of that cannot be. I remember some years ago going to Brussels, to this Museum of Central Africa, and encountering a whole bunch of recordings that some ethnomusicologists had made of music from Zaire, then Zaire, you know, the DRC. I'm listening to this music and I'm thinking, this could be from my backyard. How come I didn't know this music? I bought 25 CDs. No, I used my credit card. But, you know, I bought 25 CDs to go home and just listen to that stuff. And there's plenty of this music, you know? We should be listening to music even when there are no scores. That will then make us begin to transcribe some of this music. And don't listen to those people who say, don't do transcription. They're using Western notation. And they're saying it to me in a Western language. Don't do that, you know. Let's get these things done, because as soon as you have these things transcribed, there is a basis for discourse. You know, nobody is saying that this is the end or this is the last word. We're just saying this is the beginning. And one really last thing, and then I will shut up. You all know this anthology by William Chapman Yahu. It's Piano Music of Africa and the African Diaspora. We're talking about this with Sheung and Bode last evening. This is an anthology that was produced from what can only be called a labor of love. Chapman Yahu, on his own, decided, we don't have a single anthology that brings together selected works, not always, but selected works from various composers for piano on the African continent and in the African diasporas. And he went through all manner of trouble to try to get composers to submit their work. Some of them were asking for some incredible sums of money because they thought Yahoo was going to be making money. But that's how we always think, this guy is going to make money from this, so I won't give him my work. But he produced this anthology, and I can tell you that there are now students, I speak for the United States only, there are students in conservatories and elsewhere who are playing from this anthology, you know? So you hear Chopin, you hear Ligeti, and then you hear Yuba, or you hear an Uzo Egwe on the same program. And this is thanks to a single anthology produced with very little remuneration, you know, but a pure labor of love. Why can't we have somebody produce a comparable anthology or a second anthology? Because this is a selective anthology, you know. Why can't we have a second one and a third one and so on? So there's a lot that we can do, I think, without waiting for the institution as a whole to move us. I think that's part of our problems, is dependency on institutions.
Well, Prof, thank you so much. There is somebody that, okay, of course, everybody wants to talk, I know. But do you know what? Can we reserve the energy for Somojala? Yeah, then on a final note, Dr. Loroti, do you want to make it 1 minute, 20 seconds? If 1 minute after I'm going to mute you myself. Is that a promise? Is that a deal? Okay, let's have you 1 minute, sir.
You don't have to be hostile. Thank you. It's great having Prof here. I mean, just like everybody, there's a lot of questions on the table. But I want to quickly ask Prof his opinion on something that bothers me a lot about African art music. Taking a general survey of a lot of outputs of composers, especially, let's take Nigeria for example. I mean, let me even focus on Nigeria. We see composition much more as a work of talent. And you don't see people thinking structurally, having pre-composed ideas, or let me just say, the concept of compositional process as being a theoretical process is missing in our society. That is not surprising because because essentially traditional music, what we know is basically improvisatory. You know, it's something that comes off the cuff. And that's another issue. Can we say improvisation is a composition? But then if we're thinking of art music and its development, we're thinking theoretically. I mean, composition is a theoretical activity. So within that thinking, should we recontextualize the concept of African art music composition? Forget the kind of it's a kind of reference to the Western models where we say composition is theoretical. And because I see the fact that we see music as being a work of talent as a hindrance to the development of art music. And that brings about the question of then why do you want to theorize African music? Why are we calling for African musicology when we can't even think of creating music from the theoretical perspective? So, I mean, those are the things I keep thinking, that should we push in the direction of making Africa realize that composition is theoretical, or should we just sit tight and say, this is what we have, this is who we are, and leave our art music the way, make it improvisatory and say that's our language? That's my question, sir.
Okay. But are you going to answer this question? No. Okay. Because, I mean...
I'm waiting my...
okay.
You are there now.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying when it comes to your turn, will you be speaking to this issue?
I will remind him.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I say that because you're in a better position to do that than I am. So, I'm not quite sure how to answer that because I tend not to be able to think in those large categories of should we be doing this, in other words, improvisational, improvisatory based, or should we be doing this because it's theoretically based? Again, troublesome post-structuralists will immediately problematize that opposition because the thing that is, and this is what Anku's work, for example, is suggesting to us, that the thing that we are saying is improvised is actually ordered in ways that he is able to demonstrate, right? And so this is the master drama thing in, say, Adwa or Bawa or any of these things that he transcribes, and he shows you the systems of organization that underpin that. And people are amazed to this, but I thought the drama was just doing something. No, the drama is not just doing something. The drama is using ordered motifs. So that tradition of ordering, the thematic ideas and so on, that's something we can build on. You see, but it took Anku years to produce those transcriptions, and with his own colleagues saying you can't use a computer to do these things. The computer is not a human being, and that's what they were saying in the 80s. He persisted, and he produced those things. They are probably of more interest and impact outside the country than they are within. So in a sense, we are our own worst enemies for not recognizing the value of that. But what I'm saying is that in terms of compositional approaches, I'm always thinking there's a plurality, And so given different strengths that people have, the main thing, if I'll end on this note, okay, the main, I feel as if we are tied up in how should we do this or how should we do that, instead of getting on with it. I feel that this is one of our biggest problems. We have somehow developed a certain apathy because we claim to be thinking about the various ways, the alternatives, which one will sound more African, which one will, I think those are important, but I think even more important is the industry that goes into, when I said earlier on that you're a composer because you're miserable when you're not composing, I meant that, that you are constantly, and of course that means you're also thinking about composition. But I feel as if we expend a lot of energy on, how to do it, what is the right one, and I'm not sure that that actually is as important. If I look at European music in the 20th century, I can see that, yes, there's been a big growth of compositional theory, in part because there's less of a common language, even in the European tradition, than there was in the 19th century, or in the 18th century, where there was a language, a shared language. So Haydn is not developing theories before he writes. He knows, he has a sense of what the tonal system enables. In other words, he speaks that language, and then he can write 100 and something symphonies, or he can write X number of string quartets, The language is there. And, but when you come into the 20th century, you get a very different thing, and then you get, some people say there's an absence of mother tongue in the 20th century as far as music is concerned. I think we should be maybe a little less concerned with these broader prescriptions and just deal with individual cases. So if you're a composition teacher and you do want to give them an assignment, we're going to write pieces based on the standard pattern or on this clave pattern, something, right? As a rhythmic thing, do it. But for goodness sake, do it. Let's not spend too much time worrying about it. Leave the 3 or 4 theorists who have nothing else to do to be writing about, all the internal properties of this and so on, and let the composers do it. Because composition is a doing. That's what it is. I'll leave it there.
Okay, I think, thank you so much, Prof. Thank you. Yeah. Now you now stand, let's do that now. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Let's do it closer. Thank you.